Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. I'm on the floor this afternoon to encourage us in the United States Senate to address at least some of the needs related to the consequences of COVID-19. There's a deadline that's fast approaching. This problem is created in statute by legislation that was passed, the CARES Act, and I have introduced legislation called the RISER Act to offer a solution to the issue I'm about to describe. As COVID-19 has swept across the country, businesses and community institutions have been forced to adapt to the virus, fundamentally changing the way in which they operate. More people are working from home today than ever before, while others are being asked to dedicate increased resources for public health precautions and support management. Virtual education and healthcare have also expanded greatly as communities are forced to conduct many ordinary functions from afar to prevent the spread of this disease. Adapting to the realities of this newly virtual economy is costly. To aid in this transition, as part of the CARES Act, Congress established the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF. It's a multi-billion-dollar fund for state and local governments to disperse covering a variety of expenses that have arisen due to COVID-19. Expenses that can be paid from the CRF funds include providing small businesses and other organizations with grants to reimburse them for costs associated with handling coronavirus. This funding was partly intended to address immediate unforeseen costs absorbed by our public emergency officials and healthcare providers. Kansas County's health departments have increasingly relied on this funding to ensure they are able to meet the needs of their community now and into the future as this pandemic stretches on. Many states, including my own of Kansas, have also established forward-looking programs to distribute grants for economic development projects that respond to COVID-19, such as telemedicine, teleeducation projects, and projects that would improve broadband infrastructure in rural and underserved areas. These communities already face a sharp divide in terms of broadband availability, and this pandemic has highlighted that, unfortunately, for all the work that we've accomplished in spreading the use of broadband, the availability of broadband, increasing its connectivity, there is still plenty of areas that need to be improved for access to quality internet services. As more broadband-intensive work like video conferencing and virtual appointments now take place at a much higher rate, the urgency to improve these services increases. Rural communities stand to lose the most without these types of projects. Many of the projects require long lead times to wisely plan and appropriate and expend federal funding. However, and here's the problem, the CARES Act mandates that CRF funds be spent by the end of this year, now just a little more than a month away. This is absolutely not enough time for preparation, intensive projects to be carefully planned and executed. The current deadline puts several long-term economic development plans at risk of losing funding if they are not completed by December the 31st, and it also prevents new meaningful proposals from being considered in the first place. Many Kansans, from our county health departments to our universities, to our schools, to our cities and counties, to mayors and county commissioners that I have visited with, have urged us to extend this looming deadline. We need to have a longer period of time so that federal dollars are not spent. And I always try to avoid using the phrase federal dollars. They're really taxpayer dollars or borrowed money that has to be paid back by taxpayers. And it is a silly proposition that we would require the money to be spent when what it will mean is we will spend money less effectively and less efficiently than we otherwise would in the absence of this near-term deadline. That's why Senator Roberts and I have introduced the Remove Impediments to a Successful Economic Recovery Act, or RISER. This bill would extend that deadline for state and local governments by 2 years for a set of currently eligible expenditures that meet criteria for qualified economic development plans. This bill would allow funds for critical projects to require additional attention and time for a more thoughtful investment to be spent more effectively without cutting short or strategic investment that Congress made back in March to support our communities that need it the most. I believe that state and local governments know what's best for their communities, including where and when to spend these federal dollars. Extending the relief for CRF payments dedicated to particularly job creation projects will allow Kansas and other states to strategically target areas of need over a longer period of time, making more certain that our taxpayer dollars are making the greatest impact to help our communities, help our people recover from this pandemic. This will better ensure that the areas in need identified by states and localities have a stable source of investment that will aid in the ongoing economic recovery. That said, I remain engaged with the Treasury and Senate Finance Committee to improve the RISER Act to ensure the availability of bipartisan support. This is a bill I want to pass, not a bill I just want to introduce. While this thoughtful discussion with Treasury and the Finance Committee continues, I recognize that Congress must urgently act to extend the deadline in the meantime. While I have a particular bill that does things that I think are hugely important in this arena, I also recognize that we don't have the time to wait. Often throughout this few days that I've been home away from Washington, D.C., I've been asked, how's your legislation coming? And the answer is there's broad bipartisan support. Most senators, most Republican senators, most Democrat senators are supportive of this measure. But the issue is, will we be able to extend the deadline in time for our local units of government to know that they have additional amount of time, or in the absence of that, will we allow them or require them to spend money in ways less effective or efficient than they otherwise would? I know that there's other pieces of legislation introduced by a few of my colleagues that would offer what we would call a clean extension of the CRF deadline, and I urge my Senate colleagues to support the immediate enactment of these legislative proposals to provide flexibility in fostering meaningful investments in our home states. Around here, too often, it seems that if we can't do everything to solve a problem, we do nothing to solve a problem. I've never understood that attitude or approach. The things that we can agree on, and this is one I think we can, this extension of the deadline, we ought not wait for a larger package that continues to be negotiated between the White House and Speaker Pelosi, or between Republican and Democrat leadership in the Senate, or the Republican leadership with the Democrat leadership in the House. Whatever the negotiations are ongoing today to get us to a point in which we are addressing what we generally call Phase 4, another effort to improve the opportunities for us to provide relief to our constituents due to the pandemic. Whatever all those machinations are, they will not happen quickly enough. And they certainly will not happen quickly enough to make certain that our local officials and their citizens know that they no longer would need to spend the money that we have provided them in the next 5 or 6 weeks. By including the Coronavirus Relief Fund in the CARES Act, Congress extended a hand to states, local governments, and areas in need across the country that are looking to adapt to the new realities of the ongoing pandemic. In the absence of an extension of the deadline, money will be misspent and will certainly not be spent in the most effective and valuable way. I urge my colleagues not only to support the legislation that I have introduced, the RISER Act, but to work with others, all of us, to come to a point in which we are capable this week. If it doesn't get done this week, it probably means very little in an extension. To this week pass an extension beyond December the 31st for the use of those CARES dollars in states across the nation. I urge my colleagues to join my legislation. I urge my colleagues to join to ensure that the hand we offered under the CARES Act won't be withdrawn way too soon. Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to address my colleagues in the Senate.